have called the show before. You know, it is how dangerous it can be to make these assertions or state your belief or lack of belief in religion in a country like this. So it's very. I'm actually very happy to be able to talk about this. I am raised and born Muslim, and a practicing one. I have a family of very practicing people. But I've always been a skeptic my whole life. So even as a child, I would put forth questions that I would never get answers to. So the only thing that kept me sticking to my belief was I read a lot of science in the Quran. And I know you've spoken about this a lot, but I've never really heard about this in detail. So I'd like to think that I'm a reasonable person and I'm genuinely seeking the truth. So I'd just like to hear what you have to say about that.
There is no science in the Quran. Oh, actually, okay. I shouldn't say that. Because that might be a bit broad. So let me put it this way. Science is not just a proclamation about something. Science is a process. Science is the method by which we discover things about the world. There's no method that I'm aware of in the Quran. What there are claims that many years after the fact, people go back and say, oh, hey, look, science has just discovered this, and I can read this passage in the Quran or in the Bible or wherever, and I can kind of interpret this in a way where it seems like these people were making proclamations about science. If there was a proclamation about a scientific fact, it should be something that should be specific and profound, like not just, oh, you should wash your hands, but, oh, here's an understanding of the germ theory of disease. Even though you don't know it now, there are these little things that are far too small for you to see that are the cause of illness in human being. And at some point in the future, you'll develop a technology that will allow you to see things that are smaller than you can see with the naked eye. That would be kind of profound. It wouldn't, though, even if that's what was in there, it wouldn't tell us it wouldn't enlighten us as to the fact or provide any demonstration of it. Because even if you had a book that was, let's say, 1,000 years old, that talked about entities too small to be seen with the naked eye that were causing disease, you have no foundation upon which to accept that this is the truth until there's actual evidence for it. And the books aren't providing the evidence. And mostly, they don't say anything remotely that clear. Instead, it's, I've heard that the fetus looks a little bit like chewing gum, and look at this, the Quran is saying something amazing about fetuses that we wouldn't discover for many, many centuries after. And that's not even true. If you think people in agrarian societies watching our animals where there's, hey, this, I cracked open this egg and it's got something in it, or my cow gave birth, or my cow had a miscarriage, or we cut open this cow to eat it, and oops, it turned out this cow was pregnant. It's got a little thing in it. People knew what was going on inside of bodies. They didn't know everything about it, and plus, describing the fetus as being roughly like chewing gum is just kind of describing what it looks like. It doesn't tell us anything about what the fetus is or the process or any of that. So I have yet to hear anything from any of the holy books that I could view as, wow, how did they know that? But if I had heard that, then the position I have to take is, did they know that? Is this a coincidence? How did they know that? And how did it enlighten us at all? Because we didn't know it to be true until we had done the work. So it's completely useless for somebody to include something in a holy book that you still have to go out and prove.
Yes, and I called in to the show one time earlier, and I spoke to Jen, and I spoke a little bit about the embryology, and this was pretty much the same answer that she gave me. And I accept that. But if I can give you some more examples about what have now been found to be scientific truths, would it not be plausible to say that this could not have been known at the time?
It doesn't.
Now?
You haven't demonstrated that it was known at the time. The fact that, this is what I was just saying.
No, it wasn't known at the time.
Okay, give me an example. That'll be easier. Give me an example of the one that you find implausible for them to have known at the time.
I want to insert something before we go and do this, though. Hold on just a moment. I had somebody contact me one time about a video where they said that it was based on the Quran, and the person was making an argument that how the earth had formed was described in the Quran. And it came with graphic video, you know, like illustrations and stuff. And it was basically showing that the core of the earth was iron, and that this had occurred because some sort of iron body had impacted with the earth hard enough to go into the center of the earth, somehow didn't destroy the whole thing. And they were saying, this is how it's told in the Quran, and this is how the earth is made. Isn't that amazing? And so the first thing I did was go and look up how the Earth's core. And when I looked at the scientific explanation, it had nothing to do with something iron impacting the Earth a long time ago. It was about how iron is very heavy and dense, and how it would naturally, you know, go to the center of gravity. And I'm probably butchering it, but the idea was that of all the elements on the planet, iron would be pulled toward the center more than any other, and so you would end up with an iron core. And I kind of thought to myself at the time, when the person made this video saying that this is evidence that, in their mind, that a God gave people this information, and now that I'm looking at it and the information is scientifically inaccurate, I'm like, does that mean now that they're going to say that the Quran is bunk because this thing that they're saying is foretold or is described in the Quran is not what they're saying it is? What I would probably expect to see is that people would say, oh, the model that I came up with was wrong, and that's not really what the Quran was saying, and really it was describing, and then they find where it describes the way that the earth had matter that was heavier and more dense, and that it ended up in the center. Whatever the scientific theory is going to be, it's just about finding things that kind of sound good enough to fit those models and then using them. And the interesting thing is that scientific theories sometimes change, which I find that fascinating, because then what happens to those models in those holy books that are, you know, describing exactly what science is telling us, when science then says, hey, our model was wrong?
And okay, I would still like you, just give the one example that you think is like the best example. And
okay, and like I said, I'm a skeptic. I've seen most of those videos, and I don't agree with them because they come with an agenda, and they have the conclusion first, and they're trying to arrive at it. The example I have is of the expanding universe. There is a verse which says that we have built the heaven with power, and it is we who are expanding it. That's pretty clear, I would say.
I wouldn't say that. I have no idea what that verse means. Does that verse necessarily mean that the universe is expanding?
I think so.
Okay. I don't necessarily
And you're saying that it says we are expanding it?
Well, that's sort of the language in Arabic.
The royal we.
Yes, it's the royal.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. And like I said, I'm a skeptic. I'm actually seeking the truth. So I'm not just trying to assert that this definitely means this. I just want to hear your views.
I get that. So taking that verse, I'd have to look at the verse to make sure that we understood it all in context, because when you just pluck out the one verse and says, you know, we created the heavens and we are the ones expanding it. So the first thing is
147.
Sure. Is Surah 147?
5147.
5147. So
yes.
The first thing is, as I said before, up until we discovered that the universe was expanding, did people know?
Wait, now this translation says, and the heaven we constructed with strength, and indeed we are its expander. I mean, the universe is
translation.
The universe is often referred to by people as an expanse. I mean, I've heard that term in English used.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Is I don't necessarily want to get to the English and the translations and stuff. First of all, I'm not convinced that it means that that somebody was asserting that the universe was necessarily expanding. It could be, the common view of expansion, et cetera. But it doesn't matter, because when we learned that the universe was expanding, it was based on discovery and evidence. If it turns out that some claim that somebody made, like, let's say I said there'll be a woman president of the United States in 2020. If it turns out that I'm correct, does that mean I knew that now?
No.
Right. So it's a mistake for us to say, here's this. How on earth could they have known that back when the Quran was written? Maybe the answer is they didn't know that. So there's a number of possibilities. It doesn't necessarily mean what people are interpreting it to mean. Number two, it may mean that, but they didn't have any good reason for it. It's not like people haven't looked up at the sky and reached conclusions ahead of time. They, before we understood and knew that there were other planets in our solar system, there were people who were observing the heavens and seeing these things moving. And before they knew what they were planets, which is originally, I think in Latin, was wanderer, because they moved around the sky in a different way than some of these others did. And so but our modern view of planet is we have a definition for it. The ancient view of planet was just, this is the name that we're going to call these things that don't behave like anything else, and we don't know anything about them. What are they? And so before someone could get to the point where they had an understanding of planets, they had already made a discovery and were labeling it. Labeling the heavens or the sky as an expanse or something that's expanding could have come about by any number of observations, or it could be not an observation at all. The answer is we have no idea. So when we ask the question, how did they know that? That's the wrong question. The first question is, did they actually know that? Does this mean what it seems to mean? If in fact they did know it, now the next question is, how did they have this information way before we did? That's a good question. Let's say you're correct, and this particular surah is an accurate, intended description of an expanding universe, and that the author understood that the universe was expanding. How could that person have had that knowledge? And the answer is, we don't know. But when you start listing off the possible explanations, God doesn't make the list, because God can't be a possible explanation until you demonstrate that there is a God, or that God can in fact be an explanation. Maybe, I don't even know what the possible explanations could be. Maybe there's Doctor Who went back and told them. Maybe they had access to knowledge and information and maybe even technology that has been lost to time. Maybe it was a wild guess. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe this person didn't know it. At no point are we justified in saying, you know what, this is just so implausible that they could have had this information that the only answer we can go to is God, because that is by definition a God of the gaps fallacy.
I understand that, but I wouldn't think that anybody looking up at the sky in the 5th century would have just guessed that it could be expanding, and the assumption is that it has to come from somebody or something that knows way ahead of time. I've heard you made this analogy before especially about the Bible, like why should you believe in the book just because it says it? In the Quran, in many places it says that we have given you signs and for you to follow the evidence and so on and so forth. And that's sort of the argument. Now, it is also possible that this is what it meant, and you're right. We can't say why or how did they know this.
Well, is it you say?
It is a plausibility, isn't it?
How can it be plausible that the best explanation is something for which we have no evidence? I mean, we know people can guess things correctly. We know people can make inferences. Science begins with an observation and then some inferences about possible explanations based on other knowledge, and then you build from there. So if we know that those things, how could it ever be the case that something that hasn't been demonstrated, for which we don't have evidence, could be the best possible explanation when we already know that people make observations and have inferences and have suspicions about how things might work. Even if that passage was about expanding, you know, you sit up and you look at the sky and you watch the clouds kind of stretch out over time. Isn't that enough to start wondering about the expansion? If you go out where you're nowhere near the city lights and you see the Milky Way, our galaxy spread out across the sky as this, you're not going to observe individual stars expanding, but you are going to observe movement. Now, I don't know how anybody could say, I don't know what the best explanation is, but I think that an all-powerful, outside of time super being that knows everything is a more plausible explanation than this was a guess, this was an observation, this was an inference, or I'm interpreting it wrong. All of those seem to me to be...
I don't think that I could hang my hat on a single word meaning something so profound as what has been robustly described by science at this point.
Yeah, one of the things...
To seek out that one word and say, you know, this must be what this means. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, before we learned that the universe was expanding, would anybody have looked at that verse and reached the conclusion that the universe was expanding?
Like, what did they think about it? Did people, why didn't then, you know, why wasn't this something that Muslims have just been saying for centuries, like since the Quran, that, yeah, the universe is constantly expanding. You know, it could have given a rate, for example, like a rate of expansion or something more detailed that would be more robust about it, that we could look at and say that this clearly is what it's talking about.
And one other thing which has come up many, many times is this. We tend to do these things backwards. Instead, try doing it forward. You're God. You want to reveal a message to people. You are Allah, you are Yahweh, you are whoever, and you have an important message to reveal to people. First of all, it's absurd to think that they would reveal it once and once only in languages that can change and texts that can be manipulated. But we'll just assume that they've made that horrific mistake. If you want to tell people that the universe is expanding and you are the cause of its expansion, would you write this verse this way, or would you say, I created the universe is expanding. I'm telling you this information, you will someday discover it to be correct. Here's the information on expanding. If there's a lack of clarity of purpose with regard to this.
Here's a question, wait, I have a question though. Here's a legitimate question for you, Ahmed. If science came out with a new model that said it was collapsing, that the universe is actually collapsing and not expanding, would you then consider the Quran to be fatally flawed, that this is wrong, that the passage is wrong, the book is wrong, and that it is incorrect in what it claims?
Yes, I would.
Really? So you would not, there's no way that you could think that maybe you've misinterpreted that word expand to mean what you're thinking it means?
I mean, I'm saying that the only reason I'm still sticking to this is because of these things, and if they're proved wrong, I will consider it flawed.
And that's a problem, though, because
if they were, but I'm talking about this one.
No, the problem here is that you're saying if these things were proved wrong.
I don't understand.
The problem here is you're saying if these things were proved wrong, I would stop believing, and that's backward. That's not skepticism. Skepticism is not, I'm going to believe this until you prove me wrong. Skepticism is, I'm not going to believe this until it is proven correct. That's skepticism.
I guess the argument or supposition here is that here's a book and it says that it's written by God, and God is saying, I am telling you all of this, and so this is why you should believe in me, because I'm telling you all of this in advance, but you'll find out.
If you were God, would you do it that way?
I would not. If I was God, I'd just reveal myself to everybody.
Yeah, so why are you a better communicator than God?
I don't know.
Doesn't it seem silly? This is the point that I'm getting. This is actually a good chunk of the book that I'm writing, If I Were God, this notion of how a God might go about revealing itself. Why is it the case that human beings seem to have more empathy, more understanding, more humanity, more intelligence than the God that was in these ancient tomes. If you were to write a new book and invent a God, there's no way anybody would invent a God that is as unwise and as closed off as we find in the Bible or the Quran or anything like this. We know better. So if we know better, and we are smarter than the God in this book, then what justification is there for calling it a God?
No, I agree with you, and there's a lot of things that I agree with you. I've been watching your show for ages now. I'm sort of on the fence. I'm not like 100% sure that this is true. It's just like I've moved very, very far away from where I started.
Sure.
And this is just like sort of the end point. There's also, for example, if I may, another verse that says that the heavens and the earth were joined together, and we split them apart. So sort of coming from the Big Bang, I would say.
See,
It seems so vague to me.
Yeah.
I honestly, when I understand that what you're saying is that when you read this, it seems so profound to you. But I'm telling you that being on the outside, looking in to this, it doesn't seem that profound. You probably have already looked at other, like Christian claims that are similar to this about the Bible. And I'm sure that when you look at them, you think, oh, this sounds so flimsy. I mean, you sound like a person who would have done that research. Have you already looked at claims like this that Christians make?
Yes, I've also looked at things like this that Muslims have made, and like I said, I've seen all those videos that you were talking about, and I started to look at them from the outside, and I can see that some of them are just saying that after the fact, and it can be interpreted in that way.
So the passage that you were just talking about, the heavens and earth were once joined and we split them apart, and you want to say that kind of sounds like the Big Bang. It sounds nothing at all like the Big Bang, because the universe is 13.7 billion years old, and the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, roughly. That's the model that we have right now. So the two were never concurrent. And meanwhile, what we describe as the heavens and we describe as the Earth, they're not separate. We're part of that, just like the other planets that are out there in the heavens. Yes, we have an atmosphere, but it's not like there's some hard line with a space of nothing in between us and the rest of the universe. We are a part of the universe. So the notion that they were once together is true in the sense that they're still together. The notion they were split apart, the heavens and the earth, is false. And any similarity you might find to the Big Bang is absurd, because there's 9 billion years in between the Big Bang and the formation of the earth.
It reminds me a little bit in the Bible when it talks about dividing the waters and the land.
Yeah.
When you look at the planet, you see that there's water and there's land, but when you look at it from a broader perspective, there's land that keeps going under the water. It's not like there's not land there, right? I mean, but it's from a perspective of just sort of, when I look out at the planet as a human being, I see there's areas with water and areas that don't have water. And so it would be easy for me to mentally divide these things. But in reality, kind of what Matt is describing is the land doesn't stop. Right? It's not like there's this divide between land and water. There's parts of the land that are covered in water, and there's still land. So these things are extremely flexible in how people can interpret them. And I think what Matt is saying is that as science starts to come out with things and you start thinking like, oh, this is reminiscent to me as someone familiar with this book of this passage, that's probably true. There probably are passages that it reminds you of. I'm reminded of all kinds of things every day that are just have meaning and connection in my head that don't really connect in reality. I understand that you're at a point, though, where you're just sort of struggling with this. So I'm not sure that any amount of us reiterating that it doesn't seem this way to us is going to make that big of a difference. But I will just say that I think that you are listening, and I think that you are being sincere in what you're saying, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go into this call. And I do have other callers, but I want to thank you so much for calling in, because I really enjoyed the call, and you are welcome to call back in the future.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I had a small other point, if I could.
Sure.
Okay, so just to be clear, so by the way, when I speak to Muslims about these verses, I say exactly the things that you're saying, with like that this doesn't seem obvious to me, and this is not this. It could have been any other way, and now you're just saying this because now we know this.
Right.
But so is what you're saying that even if what is said it comports to established science, there is no reason to believe that this is something divine?
Yes.
That's the point Matt was making. I would just make the point that it's so vague in its, you're talking about a single word. I mean, that's how...
But my question is it plausible that that could be the case?
So plausibility is something that tends to be demonstrated. When we're looking through candidate explanations for something, we can only look to things that we know to exist and that we know to be true. If a fire starts and we want to figure out what caused this fire, we can only go through things that we know and understand that could potentially start a fire. If there are fire-starting pixies or fairies out there, we don't get to appeal to them as a plausible, possible, or probable explanation. The probability needs to be demonstrated, the plausibility needs to be demonstrated, and the possibility needs to be demonstrated. It doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Right.
Maybe there are fire-starting pixies. Maybe somebody did it with, the psychic powers.
Telekinesis.
Maybe there is a God, and he's just not bright enough to be clear in communication. This is not about saying you're wrong, there is no God. It's about saying the reasons that you've given for concluding that a God is plausible or reasonable as an explanation are insufficient. They're not supported by evidence. They're not reasonable.
Yeah.
They're not. You're doing skepticism backward to say,
and if you want to put those pixies forward, you can do that, but you have to then build a model that's testable.
Yeah.
Right? So you would have to say, I think it's I think it's some supernatural fire-starting entity, because I'm really not seeing how it could be any other way. Then it's incumbent on you to figure out a way that we can then add this supernatural cause to the things that exist that can be causes, right? Because now it's like, okay, well, we can go that route, but first we have to show how we're going to demonstrate that this is actually something that exists and can cause fires. So we have to get it added to that category first of things that would be possible explanations that we know, to exist and cause fires, and then we can start looking into whether or not it meets the criteria for how these fires would get started through that method. So it's like it adds a step.
Okay, I understand. Well, I don't want to hold up the show. So,
okay. Well, no, it
was a great call.
Yeah, it was a great call, and I really appreciate you calling in.
Yeah.
Me too.
Thank you so much.
And I will be coming to the United States in the next few months. I will definitely be flying into Austin just to come.
Awesome.
Oh,
yeah,
that would be great. We would love that.
There's a physicist sitting out here that you might want to have a conversation with, because I would exercise some caution in saying anything sounds like the Big Bang when Big Bang cosmology, it's not like science makes proclamations about truth. These things are subject to revision. So if we revise our understanding of the origins of the universe based on better evidence and better models, the Big Bang cosmology might change, and then it might not even seem like it applies to that verse to you. So if you start hanging your hat on things of, oh, this seems plausible, you're not engaged in the sort of rigid skepticism that says, I want sufficient evidence to justify belief. You're going with, gosh, I really feel like I need to make some decision. I don't want to say I don't know, because that seems like, I haven't really looked at it, or whatever else. And so I'll just go with this for now. The problem with going with this for now is that if you're wrong, the thing that you believe affects other things that you might believe, and the process by which you came to that belief can definitely affect other things. Oh, what's the harm in thinking I have lucky socks? Well, it might make you think you have other lucky things, or you might end up in a Jesus take the wheel type situation and end up in a car.
Grab your lucky socks instead of the wheel. Yeah.
But I appreciate the call a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too.